So we're finally going to emphasize turn analysis, because I always say we're going to analyze board textures, and then I just never get past the flop. We're doing it this time. So, we of course need to first analyze the flop texture before we can move on to the turn, but right afterwards I'm just going to randomly generate a turn card with either Flopzilla or another program. We'll assume ranges are cutoff versus button. Just about every concept we discuss now will apply for other positions too, with button versus blind play being a bit trickier. But it's still much of the same, it's just a little bit trickier when you have someone flat from the blinds. Note my setup, it's pretty useful for analyzing hands, and then we're just going to jump right in right now. Alright, so here's my setup. I got Poker Stove, Flopzilla, and then a Word document to take notes on if we want. Here is the cutoff opening range we're going to use. You can go ahead and freeze the screen if you want and study this for a minute, but there's really no reason to. It's a very standard cutoff open. There's nothing really special about it. And here's my cutoff versus button flat. Same deal. Really nothing very special about it. I don't feel very passionately about the weaker hands in this range calling them. If you want to 3-bet them or fold a lot of hands in this range, that's fine. Although I wouldn't really recommend 3-betting the pocket pairs. And then I'm calling with 25% of my aces and ace-king off. That gives me a little bit of protection against squeezes, and it lets you do some nice things on king-high boards. Again, I've talked about that in other videos. We won't spend too much time here. So, here are the ranges. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. So let's make a random flop. Alright, ace of spades, queen of spades, 4 hearts. And as I discussed in my previous videos, the way I like to start with analyzing a board texture, there's many ways to do it, is I kind of like to start thinking how valuable is position. So on this board texture, I don't think position's all that incredibly valuable. Of course, position's still quite good, but it's not all that incredibly valuable because it's pretty easy to check a call when you're out of position here. It's actually about as easy to check a call on this board texture as I really think they come, because if you look at the cutoff opening range, there's just a lot of top pairs or betters that we can even do middle pair. There's a lot of middle pair or better that can very comfortably be check called here when you're out of position. Whereas when you're in position, whereas on other board textures, it's much more difficult to check a call. Here, since there's a lot of high cards, it's pretty easy to check a call. The other thing you want to do is, and this is going to matter less for cutoff versus button ranges, is you can take each range, you can plug it into Poker Stove, and then you plug in the board texture and you get a sense for how much equity each range has. So as of right now, the two ranges that we're using, actually, let me take off the ace, king, and aces. So you want to be careful if you're using like only a certain amount of ace, king, and aces that you add in the right amount. So I'm just going to do that right now. We'll leave in 2 aces. So right now, before we see a flop, the cutoff opening range and the button flatting range have almost exactly 50% equity each. So then we plug in the flop texture to see if the equity sort of changed. Did one range get more equity? And just because one range got more equity does not necessarily mean that board texture favored that range, but it usually does. So not all equity is created equally. So sometimes a range can actually get more equity on a certain board texture, although the board texture didn't hit that range all that well. Because remember, you want a lot of nutted hands more than you want a lot of marginal hands. Even though if you have a whole bunch of marginal hands, it will give you a lot of equity. So here, the equity went up a little bit for the cutoff. So I guess the ace high board with the queen just favored the cutoff opening range a little bit at a glance, which is fine. Okay, so let's start talking about what we're going to kind of do here when we're out of position. So out of position, if we bet all 3 streets, I don't think the button will need to call down with worse than ace-jack. Even ace-jack might be limited to some combos. Because if we look at the cutoff versus button flat, if we were to go 75% pot size bet on all 3 streets, so this is the top 24% of his range. If we were to make a 75% pot size bet on all 3 streets, you usually don't see a player who faces a 75% pot size bet 3 times call down with worse than the top 25% of his flopping range. Sometimes it's even a lot less than that. So right here, if someone goes bet, 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 and we're in position, we're not usually going to end up calling down with hands like ace-10, ace-9, and ace-8, because we're just going to be able to fold them by the river in order for our opponent to really have any incentive to bluff. So here, it's going to be really hard for the cutoff to even value bet ace-jack effectively, because even with ace-jack, at best, it's kind of going to split if ace-jack goes bet, 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 and the opponent calls down. Whereas in reality, it's probably going to mostly lose. And you also want to think the player in position here actually has a lot of really premium hands. 8.33% 2-pair, so it makes all those ace-queen off combos. And then the cutoff open only has 2-pair 7%. So here, when we're betting out of position, most people recklessly bet pretty much all the time with the pre-flop raiser, especially at low stakes. Here, I don't even really like value betting ace-jack. I think you can probably value bet ace-king. My mind would not be blown even if ace-king's not a value bet. And when I say ace-king's not a value bet on the flop, I don't mean it's not a profitable bet. I just mean it's possible that ace-king has a higher EV as a check, because this is the board texture where you really need to bet ace-king on the flop for protection. You're not afraid of giving free cards, and it sucks when you bet ace-king and get raised. So when we're out of position here with ace-king, we're kind of asking ourselves, okay, is it better that we bet ace-king on the flop? That way if we go bet, we'll get value from, are we getting enough value from ace-jack to justify betting on the flop? Because what sucks is when we bet ace-king and get raised, our hand instantly becomes a bluff catcher.